a little after 10 a.m. We are taking up H506, an act relating to the approval of the adoption of the charter of the town of Charlotte. We're getting testimony from a couple of people in the community. And we're starting off with Karen Frost, who's the petitioner of this charter request. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, yeah, just I wanted to have you have a quick conversation or a conversation with the committee about what transpired to put this proposal forward.
I appreciate that. That's what I was hoping to do, is explain how I came to be here and why, and then I'll do my best to answer any questions that you might have. So yes, thanks for the opportunity and inviting me to testify. This all started last November. I attended a planning commission meeting and I met Matt Citarella, a self-described policy geek, who regularly attended the planning commission, development review board, select board meetings, all of them. We moved to Charlotte 40 years ago, so I'm like an old timer now. So I was really encouraged to see somebody young who was so engaged with, with local affairs. Matt and I realized we shared the same concern about the Home Act, removing the ability of a rural town to guarantee land use regulation changes be put to a townwide vote. And in fact, we had both written to Shay about it when it was under discussion in 2023, as did other people in Charlotte. And then Matt explained that the way we could try to restore the guarantee to the townwide vote was through the charter process. And as your legislative council commented after Shay presented the charter, this is what charters are for. Any town in Vermont has the authority to adopt a charter that can change state law for its community. So recognizing this is an ambitious undertaking and it takes a lot of time and resources of many people, we wanted to be sure enough other Charlotters thought it was important too. I took advantage of the November election, knowing Charlotte historically has a high voter turnout, took my handy clipboard and stood outside town hall and talked to people. Did they know about this? What did they think about it? Did they think it's important? And I didn't influence opinion. I didn't lead the witness. I just really wanted to know what people thought. And very quickly, I learned several things. They did not know about it. They were not okay with it. And they did think it mattered. So after 2 hours, I had 38 opposed to the rule change, 1 in favor, and 2 undecideds. And it wasn't only the numbers, but it was the strength of people's opinions. I mean, they were pretty unequivocal. We're not okay with this. So that was enough for us to get started on the charter. Then we had the time crunch to get the article on the ballot for town meeting. But again, within several weeks, we had over 250 signatures, way more than the 5% you need to get on the ballot. And also kept receiving messages from people saying, thank you, this is important. And what stood out to me, I've worked on other town issues in the past, was how widespread the support is. It was old residents, new residents. It was across the whole political spectrum from conservatives to progressives. So everybody seemed to share the opinion that this was important for our town. And then on March 4th, the article passed by Australian ballot by more than 2-to-1 margin, 694 in favor, 335 opposed. So why do the voters of Charlotte think this is so important? There were several consistent themes, and I've also have quotes from input that people gave us. The first, civic engagement. It's one of the things that makes Vermont special. The engagement and participation fosters a strong sense of town stewardship and ownership among residents. It's crucial for us to democratically review, analyze, and vote on planning decisions made by our appointed boards. Another person said, as a Charlotter, I want to preserve my right to civic engagement. Land use regulations affect us all in different ways, and it's important that we have a decision-making process that includes all residents. Another, my father introduced the first land use regulations to the town of Charlotte in the 1960s. People here get involved. And in rural towns like ours, where making a difference seems possible, we need to strengthen civic engagement and voter participation, not do things that disenfranchises people like taking away townwide vote. The second theme was about the power of the select board and transparency in government. The select board already appoints the members to the planning commission and the development review board. As a result of this provision, they now also have the ability to pass regulations crafted by their own appointees without a townwide vote. This sets the stage for conflicts of interest and could have detrimental consequences even for how policy is developed. More quotes. These are massive decisions. Having citizens involved engenders a deeper dive, a more thorough investigation and understanding, and a broader consensus. Another, for most people, their home and property are their most valuable asset, and they work very hard to get it, take care of it, and pay property taxes on it. Land use regulations determine what you can do with your property, what your neighbor can do with theirs, and guides the future development in our town. These decisions are too important to be left to the select board alone. And the third theme was about the importance of building consensus. How do we help people feel like they have a voice? The more people who vote, the more our collective decisions reflect the will of the people. Local government belongs to the voter. Let the select board rule, then complain about it, or participate, get involved, and decide as a town. The new language would allow motivated planning commissions and select boards to push through sweeping changes to land use regulations without having to get that buy-in, which to me feels like the sacrifice of a core value. And a vote by a 5-member select board, so hypothetically 3 people, is not going to result in the buy-in from the broader community on issues like zoning bylaws that are instrumental to our town's future. So in conclusion, many who live in Charlotte have young children or elderly parents or businesses where they're trying to get employees, and we are all feeling the impact of the housing crunch. Charlotte is a town where people get involved and for generations have worked hard to improve and be good custodians of our community and natural resources. Instead of disenfranchising Charlotte voters, we want to create more housing opportunities by harnessing grassroots ownership and problem solving that have built and nurtured the town assets we love, like our children's center, our senior center, our library, our Grange Hall, just to name a few. We have recently changed the structure of our planning department to streamline and simplify permitting. Our land use regs are under review with guidance from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. A citizens group on their own has undertaken a mapping project to look at every parcel of land in town and really figure out where growth is possible, potentially bringing in more people and landowners. Our town plan is up for revision next year, providing an opportunity to align goals and vision for our town with today's realities. This charter is not about closing the doors to Charlotte. It's about retaining and growing civic engagement. It's about building on the values and years of hard work and commitment by so many that have created the town we love. It's about continuing to work to solve the issues facing our community by more of us, not fewer. And it's about transparency in government, all with the intention of crafting the best possible outcomes for all. So that's why I'm here. Thank you for listening. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
It's first thing, thank you for the formal statement.
Welcome.
Is it possible for you to share that with our committee assistants so we can just have it
Sure.
on our page for reference at a later date?
I'll email that over.
Okay, no worries, no worries. I guess I'll just open up the table for questions. Perhaps. Rep. Nugent?
Could you talk a little bit about specifics, like what you're hoping to get out of what you're hoping to be able to do with this charter change and what you can't do right now?
The charter it would guarantee that we would have a townwide vote. It would make it permanent. Whereas now, you could continually approach the select board and ask them to bring something to townwide vote, but they're not obligated to do it. And it's a lot of work, and who's going to constantly keep up with doing that? And the members on the select board change. And if they're not obligated to do it, things happen, things, it may not happen. And it just was very clear that it was important to a lot of people in town. And we thought this was a way to permanently restore. We're not asking for something. This is something that was removed, that previously exists. It got all struck out with lines. So we're asking just to restore something that we previously had. Does that answer the question?
I was kind of thinking about like specific types of projects, or if you had anything, that kind of like development that was in mind.
Oh, no. This pertains to changing your land use regulation bylaws. So if that's, which usually gets proposed by the planning commission to the select board, and then it's a matter of who gets to vote on it.
Brett Boyd?
Do you know how often Charlotte is changing their bylaws and land use regulations?
Historically, they come up, like right now, because of with the involvement of the Chittenden County Regional Planning, there's a big review going on and there are a lot of changes being proposed. But historically, it's not every year. It would be periodic because it takes time to work on these things. So they come up periodically. They would put them together as a group and then you'd vote on them at town meeting by Australian ballot.
Representative Hagan?
Thank you. Out of the voters that you quoted the vote 694 to 335, what percentage of eligible voters voted in that election? Do you know? And I may have heard that from another witness, but I can't recall.
I don't. This vote, so there was town meeting day and then this took place not on that same day. I don't remember why. So it was within, a day or so of town meeting. But I'm sorry, I don't have the number.
That's okay. I can ask a town official.
Waters Evans?
Just being from Charlotte, we voted on this on town meeting day, but actual town meeting took place up the Saturday before town meeting day, which was the regular voting day, which is a Tuesday. I believe we have just over 3,000 registered voters in Charlotte.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So it was at the Australian ballot portion of town meeting day on that Tuesday.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah, on the voting day, that Tuesday.
Anything else?
Well, I just do want to check that because I think what you're kind of getting at how many people really spoke, I'm pretty sure it wasn't the same day as town meeting. I just can't remember why. I think it might have been the 5th.
Saturday. Town meeting day is a statewide day where we do all the elections, and that is always a Tuesday.
Yeah.
And we had town meeting, at the school on the Saturday before town meeting day. That's why they were 2 different days.
We should still probably vote on Tuesday.
We all voted on Tuesday.
But it was at a different time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual to not have the same, maybe have the same number of people show up.
So to clarify, it was during Australian balloting that this vote happened.
Yes.
So that would have been on the official Tuesday that every,
Thanks.
schools have off and other folks vote on other issues as well.
Representative Bissell?
Just as history, this March was very just town meeting, just early ballot voting. So for a third of the voters to turn out, that's a pretty good percentage.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, that's
good
because
background
it's
knowledge.
usually a March vote. With nothing going on other than town Australian issues, it's usually a really poor turnout. So, yeah, so 33%, a third of it is a good percentage for turnout.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. If you want to stay with us in case something else comes up, please feel free.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And Lee, how are you, sir?
Morning, everyone. My name is Lee Crone. I retired after a long career in municipal government. Find myself now as chair of the Charlotte Select Board. And Karen gave a very eloquent statement as to the genesis and the outcome of this proposed charter. I'm happy to answer any questions or provide other information. I volunteered and worked in towns that had both forms of adoption of zoning bylaws, whether by town meeting or by select board, but I'm here to support as best I can and answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I was just, if you could just give us a little bit of like your perspective on like the lead into this, sort of what was done at the state level in your eyes, where this, and I'm not asking to necessarily just like parrot what was just stated, but I just wanted to get a sense of your perspective as to the necessity to this.
Sure. Well, as we all know, statute previously had provided different approaches to adopting zoning bylaws, whether a rural or a so-called rural or urban town. And as Karen stated, Charlotte had always voted zoning bylaws by virtue of Australian ballot. The Home Act, as we know, changed that, and that clearly created concern among the residents of Charlotte, feeling that they were losing control of how those decisions were being made. There are different approaches to all of this, but I think my role here today is to support this charter as proposed and as voted by the residents of Charlotte.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions for Lee?
But I appreciate the opportunity to be here by Zoom.
I actually have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just Eileen, can you, amongst the select board or just conversations that you have had, has there been any, I know there hasn't been like a formal discussion about it. Can you give any insight into whether or not the select board would be, because you can put certain land use regulation questions to the voters, you're not obligated to make all those decisions yourself, right? So
Right.
is there a general feeling about, is that something the select board would be amenable to? Or I don't know if you've had conversations about that with your.
Well, just to be clear, from a timing perspective, I was elected just this past March, so I was not part of the select board during the genesis of the proposed charter and the lead up to that vote. If hypothetically, and I'm not here to argue against the charter in any way, but hypothetically, if this didn't pass through the legislature, my belief, without having talked with my fellow board members, is that this board would be very open to that concept of listening and determining if there were major changes being proposed to send those to the voters. Again, I've seen both sides of this, and I'm not trying to imply in any way I'm arguing against the charter, but there are also many types of zoning changes that are quite de minimis or that are simply mandated by statute. And if those can only be voted on once a year, it can create some timing challenges or complications that you just simply can't adopt simple things that make a lot of sense. So the residents have voted, they want all of these land use regs to go to the voters, and that's what I need to be here to support.
Any other questions for Lee at the moment? All right, thank you, Lee. If you want to just stay with us in case any other relevant questions for you pop up.
Well,
Great.
thank you for your time and attention to this and the many other matters I know that pop up under the Golden Dome.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Okay. Third on our list is Senator Ron Hinsdale. How are you, Senator?
Good, how's everybody? I have not been to the mezzanine.
I was just going to ask the.
Oh, I don't know if you heard me outside going in
Yeah.
It was hard to find.
It's always been hard to find, but now you don't want to be found, you know? You have a beautiful committee room.
We are comfortable with our new abode. Yes, thank you. So, welcome.
See everybody, Senator Keisha Ram Hinsdale, Chittenden Southeast, and the main author of the Home Act. So, while I have while I've tried to be careful and thoughtful about representing the full legislative intent of the Home Act, I would say I'm asked to do that a lot because unlike Act 250 or some of our laws of 50 years ago, people have a living, breathing person who, wrote most of the language to talk to. I could have yanked Senator Baumgart's, out of whatever he's doing right now. But as folks know, we're pretty tight on our side and we have the budget coming up today. So a couple things I want to say, and I do have a PowerPoint, and it's nice to see constituents. I do have a PowerPoint, and I want to say first, I wouldn't say I was reluctant to come here, but I want to be very explicit as the chair of the Senate Ethics Panel that not only is Charlotte in my district, but my husband grew up there, has a family farm there, and was the subject of an agreement. Not him personally, his mother owns the farm, but their family was the subject of an agreement with the town before the Home Act to turn their family a farmhouse into 4 units of housing because they now rent out their house and the horse barn that they have on the same road. So that was an ethics complaint that was filed against me in the Senate and was summarily dismissed because the Home Act in terms of quadruplexing and things like that had to do with being along water and sewer, which they are not. There was no personal gain for us. And in fact, what you're going to see in my presentation is that I would argue that most people who rent property would stand to lose from what I am proposing, because the more housing that we have available to people, the slower rents grow. And what we are seeing is the housing crisis of our own making, where the cost of becoming a renter or a homeowner in Vermont is far outpacing people's wages. So overall, my presentation to you has nothing to do with Charlotte. It has everything to do with communities wanting an exemption from a law that set a floor for a very specific reason. And I could have brought Color of Law or some of the, Abundance by Ezra Klein. But Ezra Klein, for example, in his new book, would argue, and I highly recommend people listen to his podcast or read the book, that we allow so much democracy in terms of who is able to participate in their community on housing decisions that we crowd out the voices of those who do not have housing. And we make that process more expensive and slower to our own detriment. So I just have this was about another bill for this year from Natural Resources, but I will never miss an opportunity to just go through why we passed the Home Act and why it's so critical that we do not let communities depart downward from the standards that we've set. This is the housing inventory in Vermont leading into the middle of the pandemic. And the next slide, Autumn, you're amazing, thank you, is the home prices at the same time. So we saw the largest home price increase in Vermont history over the course of the pandemic. Meanwhile, the supply of housing was plummeting. This is a very basic macroeconomic graph that we're looking at. There is a direct correlation and causation. This is important to all of our committees. Sorry, the next slide, Autumn. We know that in our area, particularly in Chittenden County, people are in motels for longer. It costs us more because it is harder and harder to find a place to live. So before the pandemic, it took 80 days to find a place to live. During the pandemic, and I would argue to this point now, even though the data hasn't been updated, it takes a very long time. It takes over 250 days to find a place to live. You're lucky. This is something I care a lot about in economic development, but it's not like we just always had help wanted signs out in Vermont because we're rural. When we lost access to housing, the number of jobs that are open spiked. And we now have over 20,000 open jobs. Charlotte, I would argue, all of Chittenden County is in our largest employment corridor, and yet does not at all have the housing supply to support people who want to be employed in those large employers that make us innovative and great in the state. This is to show you that, I truly am not doing this for the benefit of any landlord, of anyone who rents properties. It is the absolute research consensus in the country. This is Pew Charitable Trust, that when you add more multifamily housing, rents slow in their growth, if not decrease, and homelessness drastically is reduced. That has been true in Minneapolis, Austin. You can literally look at communities and how many units of housing they've added and how much lower rent and homelessness are. That I would argue is a function of the kind of housing goals that we've set. This basing off this off the research consensus is why we set housing goals in every community, so that we would have a 5% rental vacancy and a 2% homeownership vacancy. That's considered healthy enough to not end up with a homelessness crisis or rapidly growing rents each year. We can skip this one. This one's important to me in other contexts, but we around the time of Act 250 and the weaponization of municipal land use laws, we also saw a loss of access to homeownership for a lot of types of folks in the state because they could no longer access a cottage, a duplex, multifamily housing. Large acreage is you can put a mobile home on that, you can put a manufactured house on that, but that's unaffordable for people if you require multiple acres. That's why you have this slide. So this is the average lot size in every state in the country. There's Vermont. The average lot size in Vermont is 2 acres. That is like a UFO hovering above the acreage size of the rest of the country. That is extremely expensive for people, regardless of the type of housing you can afford to put on that. So that goes directly also to land use bylaws, which, if you still require an acre, 2 acres or more for a lot, you have essentially zoned people out of your community in a very, what I would argue, whether you mean to or not, in a very biased way about who can afford to live in your community. These were more for the natural resources committees, but you can see what I am talking about. When people have to commute from long distances to our largest employment corridor, it is bad for the planet. And this is especially bad for the planet and bad for climate change, even though people will weaponize environmental arguments against building more housing. We have the highest rate in the country of households of 2 people or less. That's 70% of our households are 2 people or less. And we know we don't have a lot of multifamily housing. So what does that mean? That means older people living in homes they can't take care of, that they can't afford, and wanting to sell those to a family that could potentially afford it, even though the prices are high, but they don't have senior housing to move into. What most of the asks of Shelburne and Charlotte and the communities I live in is to have more intergenerational and senior housing. And if even that is being stopped and delayed, we have a bigger housing crisis and social crisis on our hands than most other states. This is also an environmental problem and a human health problem. We have one of the oldest housing stocks in the country, as does most of New England. And building more multifamily housing would take care of a lot of that concern. Won't go into mobile home park residents, but you've seen this in the news lately. We have mobile home parks. Thank you, Autumn. And we can go to the last slide on the data, which is this is between 30 and 40,000 are the number of homes we need in the next 5 years to have a healthy vacancy rate, so people who are climate displaced can move into healthy places to live, so that the cost of housing goes down. And every community has a housing target to meet. And I'm going to be proposing to Senate Finance that if a community is unwilling to meet their housing target, they should have a higher property tax burden than communities that are working towards their housing target, because it is a cost to the whole state that some communities are unwilling to grow their grand list. This is essentially where the Home Act encourages growth. And we can end here. Charlotte is, I don't even think on the map, except maybe it has a village center. But the Home Act is geared toward speeding up routine bylaw changes, speeding up the development of modest multifamily housing in our population centers. This is human habitat. This is where we need to build, or we have not lived out the promise of Act 250, which is compact village settlements. We have created gated communities, and we don't have gated communities in Vermont. So I wanted to keep it very broad and about how Chittenden County is experiencing even more of an acute piece of this than the rest of the state with our very, very low vacancy rates. but also having employers that require people to drive from other states and from many counties away to be part of our workforce in a time of economic. So I just never miss an opportunity to talk about the importance of housing and the Home Act with people and why I believe and the legislature believed when it ended single family zoning that it was inappropriate for communities to depart downward from the standards that we set.
Thank you for that, Senator. So you spoke to what the healthy rates were for apartment vacancies and freestanding homes for sale. To what the healthy target number is. Do you know what the current number is at in the state?
It varies from county to county. We had some kind of mini celebration because it is above 1% in Chittenden County. That's for rental.
Yes.
When we wrote this bill, there were 20,000 open jobs and less than 1,000 home listings in the entire state. And most of those home listings are not close to where employment is. So, it's a very big gap, I would say. And most of the state is at very low home ownership vacancy and doesn't have the kind of rental prices that people tend to be able to afford, but vacancy is loosening up. I would say thank you largely to places like Williston and Essex and Winooski that have really been, and South Burlington, that are just grazing 2% vacancy in their rentals. And housingdata.org is actually a Vermont website run by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and they can tell you all of that data, what each town's vacancy rate is, and how many people, what percent of people who live in that community also work in that community.
No, thank you. I mean, as someone who is a small business owner for a very long time, like the stress on the workforce with housing being one of the primary difficulties, it's a very pronounced problem. So I certainly understand that.
Yeah, I don't know if the select board chair knows his housing target per CCRPC, Mr. Crone, but I imagine it's pretty modest. I mean, Burlington's for the next 5 years is 2,000. They're hopefully going to make a huge dent in that with a hula project and all the support. But it's yeah.
If I may, the proposed housing target for Charlotte is indeed quite modest, and I would hope is achievable.
Do you know what the number is, or?
I don't recall. I've seen the data from the Regional Planning Commission, but it's a small number over that several-year time frame.
So yeah, I'm not trying to bring the hammer down on any community. Everyone, if they do their part, has a very modest housing goal to meet. And our largest housing goal over 5 years is Burlington at 2,000. Some of us were at the opening of an affordable housing project in Middlebury, where Stonecrop Meadows was, launching 250 units. And we had the select board chair there say, this is 250 or 500, and I can't wait to get to that 500. I could have cried, because that's all we're asking our communities to do is not delay and deny in a way that limits people from being able to access housing in each of our communities.
Any other questions from the table, please, for Senator Rom? Hold on one second. Just want to make sure that we're all good here. Representative Hooper, then Representative Pisnell.
How are we supporting employer-driven findings?
We've gone back and forth on those kinds of policies, mostly because it is concerning to have your employer be your landlord. So we've helped fund projects that we know are transitional and, like the hospital project with infrastructure. So as with the CHIP bill you're discussing and other bills we have on the table, the best thing the state can do now that we've gotten out of the way in some of these permitting processes, I argue we need to get out of the way in more, but the thing that we can do now is invest in infrastructure. Most communities need infrastructure to get those new multifamily projects, and that has been a large focus of the housing work this year.
Representative Pisnell.
Dorset is currently building a new town office on a piece of land that we have 100 acres, and we've got proposed housing already mapped out as to how many housing units we can have. our fear is that Act 250 is gonna hold us up. Let's get started on, so, and be very costly to the town, and the town's not looking to make money, they're hoping to like bring it into the community with a new carpenter, a new plumber, a new electrician, that by the time they get this development done, there would be, huge advantages for everybody all around. So I guess the bigger thing is, these are all great ideas, but until Act 250 lightens up a little bit on their regulations and requirements, a lot of this proposed land development in town is not gonna happen, in my opinion.
Oh, do I not have my, oh yeah, can you go to my permit slide, please, Autumn? I think it was a couple after the last slide I showed. Because this is my absolute favorite conversation to have. About- Thank you. Yep. So we put people into essentially quadruple jeopardy in the state. So these are generally the permit processes you have to go through or bypass sometimes with paperwork to show that it doesn't apply to you, to build most things in the state. So the Home Act started with municipal. Act 181 took on Act 250. And this year we've been working on Agency of Natural Resources and Historic Preservation. So unless we collapse some of these permit requirements, people can be appealed multiple times for the same project until the density is reduced, until the project essentially becomes single-family homes again, when maybe multifamily housing was promoted originally. Just yesterday, Greensboro took a vote to not let their town hall be sold to Rural Edge to become affordable housing. That was sad. That was going to be 20 units of housing that are desperately needed up there. And often when, you know, I'm a believer in democracy, obviously, but when you have votes of existing people in a community saying no to new housing, you are making decisions for other people who don't have a stable place to live, or can't afford where they live, that they cannot access most of our communities. So, you know, that is a question of are these places where we should have this much democracy, if it means that people who have no voice in the process are resigned to motels and the streets and housing they cannot afford.
Oh, thank you for that. Did you have something to add?
Well, I should wait until you finish. I guess this is very compelling, but the charter is about Charlotte. And Charlotte is a rural town, and I did just read in the paper that County regional planning people have maintained our designation as a rural town. So our growth targets are modest and likely achievable. This is just a matter, we're not saying, we're all feeling the housing crunch for the reasons I mentioned. We have kids, we have elderly parents, we're looking for employees, we're all in this together. This is about the town saying how this, we're not using it as a weapon, this vote. We want people to participate and have a say in what happens in town. Slippery slope to have a small group of people making decisions like that. So I guess I just wanted to bring it back around. I hear everything that's being said, and what we're talking about would apply to our town and or other rural towns as a precedent perhaps. But this isn't an easy process to do. The town would have to feel strongly about it and take the steps. So, you know, just wanted to kind of bring it back to, you know, what we're talking about. For Charlotte.
No, thank you. I do want to be conscious of time. We went from ahead of schedule to behind schedule.
I would just say you are the Government Operations Committee. It is a slippery slope to exempt any community from a law that we believe in that needs to apply to all communities fairly and equally. So, you know, that's, I think, the question before you in a charter change.
Yes, no, it certainly is. Does anyone have any further questions for Senator Rom Hinsdale? No. Okay, well, we'll certainly let everyone know if we take this up for further consideration.
Enjoy
And
your grades.
I mean, you're just down the hall.
I know, I didn't even know this was here.
Hardly
I like
amazing.
shoved a little corner hallway.
So,
Senate rooms are pretty nice.
right? I mean, they get 2 rooms, we get a bigger one, and all maths out on the square footage, right? So, all right, we are gonna move on now to H 233. This is the grants bill that we've been talking about for some time now. On our committee page, we had some updated language that was provided by Ellen. There was also some language that Common Good had shared with some stakeholders, or the stakeholders had shared with us as additional suggestion there. That was emailed to folks, I believe, to reference. And so, yes, Rebecca.
Quick question that the bill on our committee page does not include that suggested language. Is that correct?
It is not inserted.
Okay.
No, after we had our conversation with council, that language was sent to us. So it was shared with Secretary Clark. The other stakeholders obviously are aware of it because it came from them. I'm not 100% sure if the RPC saw it. But what I wanted to do right now was I don't see Ellen, so
She's here.
oh, hey, you're hiding in the corner. Sorry, you were in rec cover of Randolph's blind side there.
Can I make a request
Fire away.
that Ellen review the newest draft 3.1 and then talk about where that other language would fit in, what the suggested language is?
Was that?
Does
Yeah.
that work?
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So today, draft 3.1 is available for the committee to review. It just has 2 small changes from the prior draft, and they are highlighted in yellow. Or two subsections have small changes from the prior draft. So when I was last here, the strike all amendment to H 233 changed this proposal into an informal working group with the stakeholders. And then after discussion, you had asked for a couple of clarifying pieces of language. So in subsection B on page 1, the entities listed in subsection A shall develop recommendations on a requirement that all state agencies accept uniform indirect rates approved for a nonprofit corporation by a federal or state agency. And so the highlighted language was added to clarify. And then also on the top of page 2, subdivision 3, a provision that whenever the secretary or designee of a granting state agency determines that another state agency or political subdivision of the state is uniquely suited to deliver certain services, the state agency shall award a grant to the agency or political subdivision of the state in lieu of compliance with any bidding requirements otherwise established by rule or law. And then, so those are the only changes that you requested last time I was here. And then you have the proposed language. I don't know if you want to stop there for questions on the current draft.
Sure, yeah, I mean, they were
Yeah, there's small tweaks.
seemingly minor changes, but no, good point. Any questions on that change before we pivot to the, nope? All right, thank you.
And so then the language proposal would add 2 additional changes. So one would be adding a statement along the lines of The entity shall take testimony from relevant stakeholders, including nonprofits who have been awarded a grant within the past year. I think that would be fairly easy to add potentially to subsection A, where it states that the three entities shall meet and consider changes regarding granting and contracting practices under the bulletin. I think you could add there, they shall receive testimony from relevant stakeholders. I did want to ask, I think the current draft is fairly informal. And so if there aren't any other specific requirements other than what the things are that they're looking at. So there currently weren't any other requirements like number of meetings or anything. So I did just want to flag that.
Anything for Ellen on this piece?
Can you repeat that language one more time, please?
Sure. And I think it is, I haven't looked at your website, but I think it's posted, you just said under,
Oh, good. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not on your committee page,
Let me,
but you were all emailed it. Is that what you?
Yeah, I
Sorry.
lost the email in the many emails that I've gotten. It's not posted, so.
No, it's posted under Emma's name.
Oh,
Sorry, it's not under my name because this is a proposal from Common Good.
okay.
Oh, there it is. Have to refresh.
Will we be hearing from Emma?
we certainly can. We also have, Secretary Clark here. We had shared that language, so,
Yeah, I'd like to know the impetus behind adding.
yep, certainly. Do we have anything for Ellen right now before we move on to?
I think there's one more proposed change. right?
Oh, yeah, we
Language
didn't
change.
do number 2.
Yeah. So number 2 is a proposed language change that would be on page 2 in subdivision 4. So it would read, so these are the list of things that the group is going to look at. Rule and process changes needed for efficient and predictable granting and contracting, including but not limited to advance payments, grant agreement execution, and payment schedules. So the bolded language there, advance payments, grant agreement execution, and payment schedules are not currently in number 4.
Can you point to where that would be in the bill?
Sure, it would be on page 2, line 7, but primarily line 8 would be right there.
Drop it.
Thank you.
All right, anything for Ellen right now before we move on to the? All right, thank you very much. And I guess, Emma, would you like to go first? Yeah.
Good morning, committee. For the record, Emma Paradise with Common Good Vermont. And thank you for considering these changes to the bill. They particularly stem from the really dramatic scaling back of the bill to an informal working group with limited requirements, as been mentioned, no number of meeting requirements, significantly fewer stakeholders, no legislators on the committee. So I really just was hoping to bring in more voices to this process, particularly because the nonprofit sector with respect to the RPCs is much greater. There's much more diverse experiences, many different agencies that they work with, many different types of grants that they encounter. So I think having testimony in this process from those stakeholders is really critical to making sure that this work is informed directly by those who are experiencing it. And then with regard to the second point, I included specifying a few more items that the group should focus on, including advance payments, grant agreement execution, and payment schedules. And I just thought it was important to call these out, given that they are some of the more important issues to nonprofits. And since there's limited representation on the committee at this time, it just felt important that we task the working group with explicitly exploring those issues as well. Answer any questions?
Yeah, no. And this has been like a very, this whole process has evolved a lot. So I appreciate the attention to it and the willingness to keep trying to work forward with a usable language. So I really do appreciate that. Any questions for Emma right now? Secretary?
I will just say broadly, we would support any additional guardrails, including specific number of meetings or anything like that, but work with what we can do.
No, thank you. And so this new language and the suggested language was shared with Secretary Clark to get some feedback from them. It's one of those areas of government that's primarily impacted by this process, as we all know. Secretary Clark, please. Good.
Good morning, Secretary Clark. Happy Secretary of Administration. It's weird to call myself Secretary Clark, but happy to be here with you again and really appreciate the work that the committee has done on this bill with the input from the stakeholders, both in state government and outside of state government. As I've been discussing this, not only with my team, but really reaching out to, grants staff across state government, some of whom were in your committee providing testimony. We want to make sure that we are responding and understanding what the root causes of the problems are that the bill is trying to address. And I'm not sure that it's quite there exactly. I do believe that the Secretary of Administration, as I testified in this committee, has purview over grants management through Bulletin 5 and other policies that we employ. I think as we demonstrated last summer, after hearing the conversations in this committee last year, we did update Bulletin 5, not only based on the discussions that happened in this committee, but also to come into compliance with federal guidance, because ultimately it's federal guidance that we must adhere to. And so I believe that we don't need a working group established in legislation in order to accomplish the goals. I am committing to taking this on this summer and through what could be a more kind of formal process, convening stakeholders, external stakeholders from a variety of providers, getting at the point that Common Good Vermont was making, because I think there are some others that we would want to hear from. What pops into my mind is the Vermont League of Cities and Towns would probably have some relevant input in this area, but that we would convene maybe listening sessions, advisory group, whatever we'd want to call it, to hear directly from the providers, not just through the testimony that we do kind of closely watch, to hear what their concerns are, what are the root causes, because part of our discussions on my team has been a lot of what the bill is asking for, we're already able to do, like an indirect rate. So I don't know that we need recommendations on how to establish accepting indirect rate proposals outside of the de minimis. But what I think may be missing is our communication strategy with external parties so that nonprofits, grant recipients understand how they would engage with the state to request something other than the de minimis. I think we have some work to do in that regard. We've focused mostly internally, but there is this whole external relationship. And I think it would be beneficial to my team to understand from the grant recipients, what are those pressure points that we can try to address through the Secretary of Administration's authority. And so, that's what I would propose back to the group, is that I would commit to performing that work this summer with my team, whether it's listening sessions, an advisory group, so that we have that, I think what has been a missing kind of from to a centralized point, a missing communication previously. It probably happens across state government in different ways, but being more formal about it coming in to the Secretary of Administration's office. So that's kind of big picture, what my preference would be.
I got Representative Waters Evans, then Henry.
Thanks. So can you explain to me if you want to address the situation, you've identified what the issues are and different ways that you can achieve that. Can you explain to me the difference between doing it as mandated by the legislature as opposed to making these decisions on your own?
Sure. And I think, my preference, I believe it is through statute designated to the Secretary of Administration kind of jurisdiction over the administration of grants in state government. And so I think that I am able to do that. It's my purview. So my preference would be to not have it legislated that I do it. And I get concerned when there's legislation that would indicate what has to be in Bulletin 5, because I believe that's it's up to the Secretary of Administration. So that's my preference. Understanding that we may need to have further discussion about what a working group could do. But my preference would be to handle it myself. And I feel like we demonstrated last summer, like we heard, we're continuing to listen and understand and want to make sure that whatever we do is actually understand the root causes of the challenges and that what we do addresses them. Because even in this updated version of the bill, like for example, B1, that's a requirement that all state agencies accept indirect rates approved by federal or state agency. We already do. We are required to accept those indirect rates that are approved by the federal government. So that's already part of Bulletin 5. And so having a working group make recommendations about something that's already required, I don't know that that's the relevance of that since it already exists in Bulletin. But I think what may be missing is helping organizations understand, like, what does that look like for you to request something other than the de minimis? But I want to hear more to make sure that my assumptions are correct because they could be incorrect. So.
Thank you. Representative Pango.
I just wanted to thank you for being responsive to last biennium's conversation and updating Bulletin 5. I feel like maybe the ask wasn't out there in front of you clearly enough. And by bringing it to a committee discussion, I think it became apparent what was being asked for. So my hope would be that something like this would also be attended to in a timely manner. So I really appreciate you offering that and putting that on the table for us to consider.
Revenue.
I had a similar question to Rep. Waters Evans, but I also, it sounded like you're saying that, or it seemed like you thought that this work group was going to require like a certain response to those questions. And my understanding of the language is that it just formalizes in a very informal way this discussion process so that there is some connection with the legislature. Is that correct? And then I guess I actually have a question for Ellen, if that's all right. If there's any jurisdiction issue between the administration and the legislature that arises from the bill, as far as you understand.
No, the legislature has the authority to establish working groups and require the administration to participate in them. This is a pretty different format that you typically see because it's very informal. But that's not uncommon in legislation to be able to require them to work on something.
And if I may, I think what I was referring to is and I'm not a lawyer, I should preface all of that. I think folks know that. In Part C of the bill, it talks about the findings and recommendations from the working group will be made to a variety of committees, but including recommendations for statutory changes and changes to Administrative Bulletin 5 or both. I think my point is bulletin 5, like I have the ability to make changes as needed. And so I would not want to have to come to a legislative committee to make that recommendation. I would just make the changes that are needed to bulletin 5. Obviously, I can't change statute. I think that's my point about the bulletin 5, and that's why we updated it last summer, as well as like associated policies that I will admit are not necessarily in plain English to understand like what it actually means. And so I think that's really a key point that through the testimonies this year is, I think, our next area of focus, amongst other things potentially.
Any other questions or? Terry? No, I appreciate the time and the input to take a look at this. We'll,
Committed to the work, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. That's just the manner in which we do it, and appreciate the partners that have brought things to the table.
all right, well, thank you. And it's certainly not the end of the conversation on this. We'll have some time to chat later with the stakeholders and the shepherds of the legislation. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're back to on schedule. All right, committee, we got one more piece here. So I know we've been going for pretty briskly, but we'll just push through on the conversation. Next topic is H508, an act relating to approval of amendments to the charter of the city of Brandon. And we're going to do an introduction and a walkthrough on this one. This is one of the newer charter changes that came in from the municipality. And our own representative, Bob Hooper, is the sponsor. Representative Hooper.
Morning. 508 is compilation of things that have happened currently in the past. One of the primary things that it does is fees the administration of the city to make changes to its voting districts rather than having to come to charter and go through the legislature every time. They take the responsibility of doing so themselves. They set timeframes by which they do them. And notice requirements, etc. The more meaty end of this is landlord tenant law that they would wish to bring into the city council arena to determine what requirements are necessary for vulnerable populations that would include older Vermonters, individuals with disabilities, and low-income people. That particularly, I think, is notice of eviction specifications and notice of what content be involved in eviction notices and similar things. Directed pretty much exclusively at landlords. And on the last page, it's kind of vague as to what the requirements are going to be at this point. So we're approving something, I think council will advise us, that is sort of vague as to what they might go to, but it would be a matter of law.
Okay. For your council. Any questions for Representative Hooper before we defer to Tucker? No? Thank you, Representative.
Good morning, Committee. Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. You should have in front of you H508 as introduced. And although there are 13 pages here, I think that you'll find you'll be able to skip about 11 of them fairly easily. Section 1, you are familiar with. This approves the charter amendments as they were presented by the voters. So we're moving on to page 2. Section 2, we have the operative amendments to the city's charter. In Section 2 of the city charter, under current law, there are an exhaustive list of the election boundaries, very similar to what the General Assembly does within its statutes, creating the representative and senatorial districts for the state. In 2023, Burlington proposed charter amendments to update the ward boundaries, and here they are removing all of those boundaries from the charter itself. And if you move ahead through all of the struck language to page 11, you will note the new language for the section that first affirms the boundaries as established in 2023, Act number M7. So that's all of the boundaries that they're striking through. They're stating that those will remain in effect until changed by the city council, which is authorized to make changes from time to time to the boundaries of the election areas. So there is no required, for example, decennial redistricting here. It is at the discretion of the city council, effectively at will adjustment.
Pam, did you?
Yeah, I did. Does that happen in any other municipalities in the state of Vermont?
I'm not aware, but I'm also not aware of another municipality in Vermont that has as many wards or as sophisticated of an internal election system as the city of Burlington has. But I can check, for example, the city of Rutland charter to see whether the Board of Aldermen in the city has the same authority.
Thank you. And my comment on that is, it does say that the election area changes shall not be made more frequently than once in every 5 years. But how, I wonder, will it be determined that it's time to do it? That's of a concern to me.
So I will approach your last part of that first, because we hadn't gotten to the not more than once in every 5 years yet. Very excellently anticipated where this was going. There's no statutory trigger here for redistricting. And there is no required redistricting within a specific time frame. So for example, the reapportionment for the General Assembly, you must reapportionment following the decennial census. So every 10 years, census data comes out, the General Assembly reapportions. There's no similar requirement here for the city to redistrict on a periodic basis. It is discretionary. However, the next sentence states that there's a limitation on when reapportionment of the wards can happen. So the election area changes shall not be made more frequently than once in 5 years. You can take that limitation on its face. The one thing that I wanted to note here is that I am not certain whether a decision from a court of competent jurisdiction stating that there are equal protection violations with ward boundaries, how that would be interpreted here. So for example, if someone were to challenge disproportionate wards within the city and a court of competent jurisdiction ordered the city to redraw their wards, how this language would be affected. It could be cured by adding a clause, for example, at the end that says, unless otherwise required by law, or a similar clause, leaving it open that if they have already redrawn the ward boundaries and within that 5-year period, a court finds that the wards need to be redrawn, that they would have the opportunity to do so under that court order.
Could you explain the phrase time to time in this context? Because is it just what they did for their charter?
It's what they did for their charter. We no longer use, for purposes of the Vermont statutes annotated, the term from time to time. We use more specific terms or ensure that if we're talking about at will, that we use that phrase or a similar phrase. But here it means at any time, periodically, but at any time. The last sentence states that changes shall be approved by the voters at an annual or special meeting and shall become effective immediately upon approval unless a later date is established by the city meeting vote. So these boundaries must be approved by the voters. Something that I would note about all of these boundaries, and it's not written here, but the city does have a city attorney's office that I'm sure is well aware of this, but the boundaries do need to be fixed in words, right? Yes. I can give you all the NCSL guide to reapportionment. I'm sure that many members still have fond memories of the reapportionment years recently, but you do need to describe the boundaries in words that have fixed meaning. There's a recent, very interesting case. Can't remember which circuit it was, but one of the judges recorded a video for his dissent instead of writing out an actual opinion. And there was a large kerfuffle in the legal community because his dissent wasn't reduced to words that have fixed meaning. Understood. I guess what I'm getting to is you can't approve max. You have to approve the words. Moving on to page 12. This is going to be the last substantive change that you'll consider within these amendments. And it relates to notice requirements for residential tenancies within the city. This proposes an amendment to subdivision 64. First, to state that notwithstanding 9 VSA section 4467 or any other law to the contrary, that the city council has the authority to adopt ordinances that have requirements for landlords to provide residential tenants with notice prior to the termination of residential tenancies. So notice prior to termination, including requirements for the contents and timing of a notice of termination. You'll notice that in the current charter language that is struck above, that this authority already exists for the city council, but that it has a floor, a minimum notice period of 90 days or a tenancy that has lasted less than 2 years, or 120 days when the tenancy has been 2 years or more. So those floors are eliminated as part of this language, and the whole of the discretionary authority is granted to the city council.
Ravango.
So there again, it's just a small group of people deciding how much notice needs to be given to tenants, and could vary. The time frame could vary between notice given to vulnerable populations and any other citizens, any other residents, sorry.
Yes, and that's the next sentence. The requirements may include special notice requirements for vulnerable populations, including tenants who are older Vermonters, individuals with disabilities, and individuals with low income. So establishing for those 3 classifications of tenants special notice requirements, and that is discretionary authority that would be granted to the city council here, not a mandate on what is included in the notice provisions. Moving on to subdivision B. This amends the subdivision to state that notwithstanding 9 VSA section 4456 subsection D or any other law to the contrary, the city council has the authority to adopt ordinances governing requirements that residential tenants provide landlords with notice prior to termination of residential tenancies. including requirements for the contents and timing of a notice of termination. So this is going in the other direction. Prior to terminating a tenancy, the tenant has to provide notice to the landlord. And this is another instance where the authority was in the underlying charter language and is becoming more discretionary. In subdivision 65, it states that notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, the city council has authority to adopt ordinances prohibiting increases in rent, that's existing language, or other changes in lease terms for rental housing within the city without advanced written notice. And again, the city removes the floor. They're striking of at least 90 days. That was a minimum notice period. They're getting rid of the minimum. This is new language we're moving into. The timing, contents, and manner of a giving advance written notice shall be established by ordinance. The ordinance may include special notice requirements for the 3 classifications that we covered earlier. So the expansion of the delegated authority here is to allow ordinances governing other changes in lease terms to carry advanced written notice.
It's the first time we've taken a look at the style of language within a charter this year, if I'm not mistaken. So for newer members, this is language that's a little bit more relevant to some of the like landlord tenant law that lives in another committee, but due to its structure within a charter request, it's relevant to us. So, and maybe a little foreign to some members. Questions for Tucker? I guess I'm just trying to see if I had. So I'm just down on the last page, 65. And so this is just giving the council the ability to create ordinances that would establish the timeline for notification of the intent to vacate or terminate a lease for both the tenant, the leasee, and the leaseor.
Yes.
Okay. I've seen language like that before.
And I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of the Title IX requirements that are being not withstood. It is 1 rental period for notice to terminate. 1 payment period, excuse me.
The 1 rental period, meaning
1 rental payment period prior to the date.
Thank you. Representative Cooper, Burlington.
For reference, our terms vulnerable population. There's 3 categories defined anywhere, or is that subject to city council's interpretation?
I can check as to whether some of these terms are defined elsewhere in Vermont law and whether those definitions would be binding upon the city council for purposes of their charter authority. My background, we've talked about how charters are later enacted and more specific in control wherever they conflict with the general law. Simultaneously, wherever the charter language is silent or where there's ambiguity, the general law fills in all of those blanks. And the Vermont courts refer to this as the harmonization of charter law and general law. So if these terms are defined terms in the statutes, commonly understood for purposes of Vermont law, then their meaning will be fixed for purposes of the city council's authority. Otherwise, the city council will have discretion in how those populations are defined for purposes of that last sentence in each of those sections. I will note that the terms that the city charter as approved by the voters used are different than what appears in H508. And the reason for that is that the terms that were used by the city of Burlington do not meet the sensitive language mandate that the General Assembly has put on Legislative Council. So same meaning, but the words on the page are different because we have a directive from the General Assembly that all of the bills that we produce and then all of the Vermont statutes use what the General Assembly has called sensitive terms. So for example, that would be using older Vermonters instead of aged, things like that.
Okay. Anything else for Tucker? All right. Was that a hand, Sandy?
Yes, please. Just trying to clarify what, and I guess Lisa had asked earlier, but Representative Hango had asked earlier. So if they do some changes within their election areas, say in 2024, 2028, and then in 2030, they're gonna have the census reappropriation. Is that, do we need to have it in there that you mentioned that there should be something saying that unless, because it's within the 5-year period?
So the city council, based on these express terms, is going to be bound to only one proposed change in a 5-year period.
So the census would not affect their boundaries if they had redone them within a 5-year period already.
We're Burlington.
Go back to page 12. Word may.
Discretionary.
That's favored as opposed to shall.
It's was proposed as a discretionary component of the ordinance authority. And since we're back in this section, I noted that for purposes of tenant to landlord notice, it is 1 rental payment period. Under general law, the notice requirement for landlord termination is 30 days prior to the termination date. So landlord notice to tenant, 30 days prior to termination. Tenant notice to landlord, 1 rental payment period.
Which would typically be a month.
Yeah.
So just curious why the words were.
There may be other fixed lease agreements where the payment is made shorter or
Understood.
okay. An apartment in New York City that I paid every 2 weeks to stay in, so.
Someone could have a quarterly payment, who knows? Rep Pissarro, did I see a hand?
Yes, one more question, please. So you made a comment that the districts needed to be mapped, not mapped, but in words. So where would that go, since we pretty much struck that out proposed?
It would be formally adopted by the city council, which is what they did anyway for purposes of 2023 Act M7. They had adopted, I can't recall, but I think it was a resolution that stated all of the boundaries and then went to, after that, the charter proposal. And was set out in the charter materials. And I believe that they even set it out on the ballot for purposes of the voters. I can't recall, it's quite a lot to set out on the ballot, but Burlington does typically put the language of the charter proposals in their entirety on the ballot.
Okay. Last call for council. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
My pleasure.
All right, committee, as we discussed earlier, we have nothing formally scheduled for the afternoon until we have the public hearing at 4. But there is no shortage of conversations and bills for individual members who are working on things. So we'll break now and not come back formally until we are in room 11 at 4 p.m. Thank you, everyone.